The club pulsed with the heavy bass of a song Ricker didn't recognize, but it didn't matter. The music wasn't why people came here. They came for the thrill, the heat, the reckless freedom of the night. And tonight, Ricker was the fire at its center. She moved through the crowd like she owned it, because, in a way, she did. Heads turned as she passed, eyes tracing the curve of her black dress, the way it clung to her body like it had been poured on. Her long dark hair cascaded in loose waves, framing high cheekbones and lips painted the color of a dangerous promise. At the bar, she leaned in just enough to make the bartender forget his other customers. "Tequila," she said, her voice a blend of silk and sin. She took the shot without flinching, the burn of familiar friend. "Did it hurt?" Ear deep voice asked beside her. She turned, meeting the gaze of a man with a confident smirk and the kind of jawline that could cut glass. "Did what hurt?" As she played along. "When you fell from heaven." She let out a low, amused laugh, her red nails tracing the rim of her empty glass. "Sweetheart, I didn't fall," as she said, tilting her head. "I walked out, set the place on fire, and never looked back." The man chuckled, intrigued, but before he could respond, Ricker had already turned away, disappearing back into the crowd. The night was young, and she was just getting started. The city hummed beneath her, neon lights flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite. Ricker leaned against the cool glass, her reflection staring back at her, lips slightly parted, eyes dark with mischief. The silk robe draped over her shoulders barely held on, slipping down one side to reveal the smooth curve of her collarbone. Behind her, she heard the door click shut. Slow, deliberate footsteps approached, each one sending a thrill up her spine. "You like putting on a show," a deep voice murmured at her ear. She smirked, tilting her head just enough to feel the heat of his breath against her skin. "Maybe," she teased. "Or maybe I just like making you wait." Strong hands found her waist, fingers tracing the delicate tie of her robe before giving it the slightest tug. The silk whispered against her skin as it slid open, pooling loosely around her arms. His hands roamed lower, molding to her hips, pulling her back against the solid heat of his body. "Is that so?" His voice was rough, laced with amusement and something darker. Ricker turned slowly, her bare skin brushing against his shirt. Her fingers played with the buttons, undoing them one by one, savoring the way his muscles tensed beneath her touch. "I like anticipation," she murmured, pressing her lips just below his jaw. He exhaled sharply, his hands tightening on her hips. "And what happens when the waiting is over?" She smiled, letting the robe slip from her shoulders entirely. "Why don't you find out?" And just like that, the last of his restraint snapped. The city lights watched, flickering against the glass, as the night unfolded in heat and whispered promises. His hands were on her in an instant, rough with need, tracing the lines of her bare skin as if he were memorizing every inch. Ricker gasped as he pressed her against the cool glass, the contrast of heat and chill sending a shiver down her spine. His lips found her throat, slow and teasing, tasting the delicate skin before trailing lower. Her nails raked down his chest, pushing his shirt from his shoulders. "You took your time," she whispered, voice breathy with anticipation. His grip tightened at her waist, pulling her hips flush against him. "You like to tease," he murmured against her skin. "But so do I." A gasp escaped her lips as he pinned her hands above her head, his mouth exploring every sensitive spot, every shiver and sigh fueling the hunger between them. The city lights flickered beyond the window, an audience to their fire, but neither of them cared. The only thing that existed in that moment was the heat between them, the whispered moans, the desperate pull of bodies seeking release. Ricker arched into him, nails digging into his skin as pleasure ignited like wildfire. He growled low in his throat, losing himself in her entirely, and as the night stretched on, she knew neither of them would be sleeping anytime soon.